Well, welcome everyone who've joined us this morning for our latest webinar, A Great Place to Work. I'm Russell Lamb, Managing Director of DMA Engineers here in this wonderful city of Brisbane. I'm sure if everybody looked over my left-hand shoulder, they'd see what a great blue sky we have behind us today, and a great day, a little bit better than yesterday with a rather cold westerly wind. Good old Brizzy. For me, I'm very pleased to be able to host the webinar today, where we're very fortunate to have as our guest Jennifer Cook, Managing Director of Customer 360, and Emma Cecchin, who is the owner of Eminence Design. So welcome, Jennifer and Emma.
Thanks, Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure today's webinar is going to be relevant to all of us right now as we grapple with the future of future office spaces and what working in offices looks like for the years ahead. We're very much influenced very heavily by our recent COVID-19 experience, and equally our never-ending pursuit to achieve an optimal work-life balance. Over the last few months, we've all been thrown some real curveballs about how we do our work, where we do it, and I think we can all agree that's created a great deal of thinking around and also a catalyst for longer-term change. It's very much unlikely that our future workspaces will look like our workspaces of old. But before we get started, just a few logistical items if I could. Firstly, we are recording the webinar today, and we'll send that around to all participants after the session is finished. It might take us a day or two to do that, but please keep your eye out for that. Also, our webinar is intended to be very much interactive. So if you have any questions along the way, please simply use the Q&A function that you'll find down the middle of your screen. It's pretty much in the middle. Please use the Q&A rather than the chat. And I'll be moderating the Q&A questions and putting them to Gemma and Emma as we go. We'll also have time at the end of the session for a follow-up Q&A session. So we're going to kick off today with a presentation from Jennifer about why the workplace isn't dead, and how the definition of a workplace has and will continue to change. We'll then hear from Emma, where she'll discuss how pandemics have historically been a catalyst for change in the built environment, how she sees office spaces and workplaces changing over the course of working from home, and why getting people back to work is important. So firstly, if I could introduce Jennifer Cook. So Jennifer assists property owners and developers with placemaking visions and strategies for high-performing workplaces that customers truly love. She has more than 20 years experience creating great destinations with clients such as AMP Capital Real Estate, ARA and GPT. Some of her recent projects, as I'm sure you'll be aware of, include Sydney's Quay Quarter and Cocker Bay Wharf, Southgate and Collins Place in Melbourne. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today, and I'd now like to hand over to you for your presentation.
Thanks, Russell. I'm just going to share my screen with everybody. Okay, so I guess the way that we're going to approach today, Emma and I, is that Emma's the expert on inside the workplace and the way things happen, and I kind of think more in my work about the outside. So we're going to go outside in, and I want to talk a little bit first about the way that we're working and sort of what are those sort of longer term trends that have been happening in the background, and then kind of what's the I guess what's been happening with the pandemic, and is that really changing everything, and are we throwing out all the trends and starting again? Now, one of the things that I firmly believe about a crisis is that it accelerates change that was already underway. So, so there's been a lot of buzz and a lot of talking about saying, oh, you know, everything that's happening in the workplace is different. It's all changed. We need to throw everything out that we knew. It's not really, it's really about amplifying, accelerating things that were already happening in the background long term, and they may be coming to life in new ways, and they may be changing in their importance, but fundamentally a lot of these trends were already underway. So we're going to look at what some of those things are. So in 2015, I was involved in a study in the workplace that was about a deep dive into understanding what was most important to employees and employers in the workplace in the future. And lots of different things came out, but there was sort of a top three, I guess, that were really, really dominant. And the first of those is about flexibility in everything. So they wanted, you know, from an employer point of view, it was about flexible leases, flexible spaces, flexible everything. For employees, it was about, well, I want different kinds of places to work and I want a lot of flexibility. I want to be able to telecommute some days. I want to be able to come in some days. I just want a lot of flexibility in the workplace. The second one was very much about what we call the normalization of disruption. So disruption isn't something that people saw happening to their business and then going away. It was more about, well, we're in a rapid period of change, so it's going to be a constant theme. So we want the workplace to be able to support us in that fact that normalization of disruption is going to be ongoing. And the third major thing was about cultural connection. So culturally connected to place and each other. So they were looking for workplaces to be a real unique expression of what their workplace culture was, and also to sort of have a cultural edge, to have some soul, to be somewhere, not anywhere. So they were in 2015, they were three really big trends that emerged from that research study. If we move forward to 2020 and we look in the context of what's been happening the last few months, if we look at that, those same top three things are just important today as they were before anyone was talking about pandemics. So rapid adaptation, I think if I hear the word pivot one more time, I'm going to scream, but rapid adaptation has been, really big feature of what companies have needed to do to change and adapt. So the workplace is still needing to support that, and it's become even more important. Everyone's talking about this idea of the new normal, and I don't think anyone really knows what that looks like or whether it's just a slightly different normal. But anyway, that idea of flexibility and the normalization of disruption is still at the fore. And this idea of cultural connection has really been amplified into this idea of how do we feel like we're together and work together even if we're physically apart. So I guess I wanted to share those things at the beginning to sort of say that the things that were really, really important 5 years ago are still important. They might just be using different language or be manifesting in different ways. So I want to go through some of these trends that have been ticking along in the background and just to give some examples in the time that we have. It's a really big topic, but I'm going to try and be really concise and use one sort of what I think is a really good example. So this idea, or the first trend is this idea about workplaces being part of the community. So this is about creating workplaces that both have a sense of community and are inviting to the community that might not work there. So this example is Urban Outfitters head office, which is a big apparel company in the US at the Navy Yards in Philadelphia. So as you can see, it doesn't look anything like a traditional office building that you would imagine. So lots of community space. They have lots of weekly events that bring in locals from around the area, both and appeal to the community that works there. They have all kinds of services and experiences. They have pet grooming, they have art classes, they have art workshops, they have lots of indoor and outdoor spaces. It's about creating amenity that has really, really broad appeal. So it's a real place, not just an office that you might imagine. And this is a big trend that we're seeing across a lot of developments. If you're only talking about sort of one building, it can be really hard to create that in a really limited space. But if you've got more space, it's about, well, how do we use those spaces better and create that sense of community? The second one is about growing the body clock of a place. So it's a pretty expensive proposition to own a large office tower in an urban area that is essentially a ghost town outside of 9 to 5. We all know those places in our own city. The cafe shuts at 3, that's it for food and coffee. Almost everyone's left by 6, and on the weekend there's just no reason to be there and it's not appealing. So making the place more active and making it more productive for more hours of the day is very much an economic priority for owners, just as much as a workplace appeal priority. So more experiences, more things to do, more people are attracted, more productivity is achieved. Dining, shopping, hotels, parks, leisure, entertainment, you name it, it's being built into the work precincts of the future. This is a great example, which is Brito Mart in Auckland. It's been around for a while, so a lot of you would know it. One thing they've been really successful at doing is cracking that thing of trying to get people who work in a place to stay later. Because that's actually quite difficult to do, but they've actually been quite successful in that. And it's not just about by offering cafes and bars and the typical things around the place and having them open late. It's also about a great events program. And in order to do that, there is nothing more important than that base building infrastructure, getting it right at the very beginning and knowing exactly what you want to deliver so that there's not a big, expensive retrofitting exercise at the end. Don't let that infrastructure get value engineered out of the process. Because programming is really, really important. And the reason I love programming is because if it's not working, you can change it really fast. It's really hard to rebuild the building, a part of it that doesn't work. But one thing that you can definitely do, if you've got the right infrastructure in place, you can change that programming to suit the workforce. So the next trend is about restorative. Now, not many workplaces have the opportunity to go to the level of Amazon. So this is Amazon Spheres, which is Amazon's showcase Seattle workplace. And these are essentially big biospheres that are intertwined with offices and event spaces. Biophilia in design and greater exposure to green space and plants is a big long-term trend in workplaces because it makes you feel better and it's healthier. And I don't think anyone's really disputing that. And I really expect this one to accelerate in what's happening in the last few months. So it'd be more and more important. And there's a lot more studies being done in this area too. So there was a study done in Amsterdam in 2017 where they basically found that employee wellbeing increased as the amount of plants and natural light around them increased, and even pictures of plants on the wall help them make them feel better. But I'm not suggesting that it's a cheap and easy cop out by any means. but it's starting to be really proven now that those things add a great amount of value to the workplace. So dynamic and distinctive. So I've been involved in some research over the past few years, and one thing that has consistently come out is that people don't like the mausoleum marble lobbies, and they're looking for lobbies that are active and interesting and busy and changing. It's not necessarily via only art, as this example for Salesforce Tower in the US shows. They really want the space to reflect what is important to them and their values and culture. So an example of that is I did some research with employees of a conservative financial services company, and they wanted a really dynamic lobby space, but it was really important to them that it didn't look too high end because they didn't want their clients to think that they were charging too much. So art that was very contemporary and dominant wouldn't actually work for them either, but it might be perfect for a tech company or a creative organization, but just not fit the culture of others. So, but everybody is after more green, more natural light, and also a place that they're encouraged to spend some time. They think of the lobbies of the future as, you know, casual workspaces, meeting places, do some social work. You know, everywhere should be an opportunity to use the space. It's not just this sort of static experience. So distinctive and dynamic kind of semi-private spaces are important as well. This idea of cultural connection that we sort of just touched on in the last slide through the art. The trend is also towards external shows of culture, extending to what we used to call office precincts. As I said back in April's webinar, everything is mixed use now, if it's a bigger project. So we're seeing completely different kinds of amenity, like this lovely water playground at Darling Quarter in Sydney, which is really, really popular, appearing as part of the amenity of what 20 years ago would have been developed purely as a work site and a workforce space. So not only does this grow the body clock of the precinct, it broadens the audience appeal, it communicates that commercial value for a site. Even if it's driven 95% by those officers, it's a place that's welcoming to a wide range of people, and it's also a family-friendly environment. So we're starting to see a lot more of that, that kind of like interesting uses mixed in with office precincts that wouldn't have traditionally been there. Okay, so I'm going to just sort of move on, I guess, to some thoughts about how this all plays out in the context of post-COVID-19 office life. Russell, have we got any questions or anything you wanted to ask?
No, there's none that have come up so far. I have a few questions, but I'll keep them a little bit later, sure. I think. So yeah, if you keep going, I'm sure the next
okay, no worries.
Will invite lots of questions.
I'm doing pretty well sticking to time for once. I generally tend to to take more than my fair share. Okay, so I don't have a crystal ball, right? But I have a few thoughts on what's going to be more important going into the future. I don't think anyone knows the answer 100%. But here's a few thoughts that I've had. These aren't entirely new concepts, but as I've said before, this is about trends that have accelerated and amplified longer term shifts as a result of the huge amount of change that we've seen recently. So this is my view. The office is not dead. Long live the office. I never think of modern offices as a holding pen for employees. We aren't in a 19th century industrial environment where there's no way you can perform your work unless you're sitting in an office. So I don't think of offices in that context. In the 2015 study I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the workplace was really importantly seen as a space to interact with clients, offer experiences, support productivity and wellness. So deliver those things that you can't do at home, you can't do remotely, and support and communicate very major aspects of culture. So somewhere to put people was not at the top of the list as to what employees and employers actually were looking for into the future, okay? Particularly the major forward-thinking organisations. That wasn't what it was about. So I think in the future, we're going to see that the best strategies are really going to combine working in an office and then working from home and potentially working from other places as well. So it's not an all or nothing approach. It's not an either or approach. So deleting the office altogether is not the best option because it's all kinds of critical value. And I think we're going to sort of see the survival of the office going forward, absolutely, but in different sort of terms. So just a quick reminder on, because I've been having a few friendly arguments with people lately who were very keen on the idea of the office being dead. And I just want to remind everybody, I guess, that this experiment of let's send everybody home and become a fully virtual organisation has been tried before by a couple of big organisations. There are probably some that have done it really successfully, but some of the ones that it didn't work for were companies such as Yahoo, Best Buy in the US, Hewlett-Packard as well. They didn't necessarily abandon remote work entirely, but they severely curtailed that idea that you never had to come into the workplace again. And it was all about collaboration and innovation. They just weren't able to manage that and successfully do that, which were really core things in their businesses if people just never came into the office at all. But there were definitely some positive sides to their work from home experiments. Turnover decreased because people were able to manage those work-life conflicts a bit better and, manage family and work schedules. So definitely has a role and definitely can work, the idea of remote working, but it's just not, I just don't think blanket remote work is going to be the solution for everyone. So in terms of the four things that I think are going to be amplified by the COVID-19 experience, number one is wellness plus. So a lot of developers and owners have become, they're quite focused on this well building standard rating. But I've had clients who I've given recommendations to that relate to wellness and well-being, and they haven't really wanted to do them. But then all of a sudden they did a 180 when they realized, I'll get a better well rating if I do that. So we have to remember that the rating is the tool, not the outcome. So it's great to get a better well rating for your development or for your property. But the importance of workplace wellness as an actual outcome is going to be, greatly amplified. So we're looking at things like, better active transport facilities, access to outdoor space, better exercise and fitness facilities, all things that contribute to physical and mental health. So if landlords and developers weren't on board with this very much before, they've got a lot of catching up to do as that office space, particularly at the premium end, gets really, really competitive. Okay, so the second idea is about social capital, so coming together with intent. So in my view, one of the reasons we have managed over the last few months to work so well and collaborate so well remotely is because we'd already built up social capital with our colleagues. So over time, if our roles need us to collaborate and interact at our best to solve problems, we won't necessarily have that because new people who join an organisation, they won't have had that experience with you in person, or they won't have created that social capital. So it's going to be a bit of a different scenario in a year's time when the mix has changed and we're not all basically leveraging the social capital that we built up when we were interacting together in the workplace physically. So I think that idea of making sure that we still come together in the workplace for very specific reasons to build social capital is really, really important. Just a quick example from a project that's being built right now. So this is Key Quarter at Circular Quay. And the way that building is designed so that every fifth floor has this kind of open, flexible, multi-purpose events and social space. So it's kind of talked about like it's a village square. So these are private client floors, the places where people can come together and do all kinds of things. And how that space looks and how it's fitted out is all up to the tenant, of course, but in these cases, it's very much about saying we have to intentionally create these social spaces, these collaborative spaces. We can't just wait for it to happen in a conventional office context. So the third one is about curated activation. So workplace precincts that are worth it. And when I mean worth it, I talk about, you know, you wake up in the morning and you're actually happy to go there. So it feels like it's worth the commute and worth the effort of getting in. And I think it's not enough just to have these great internal spaces in offices. We have to leverage as much of the precinct as we can to get people to want to come to work. Again, this is not a new trend. So creating a great offer in and around the building, if you have the capacity to do that, actively programming and curating the experience is all part of that. Here's an example from London. This is King's Cross, a very large urban renewal project ongoing, very big focus on employee amenity that is also public amenity. So lots of green space, squares, a big entertainment program, day to night, and that's enabled them to attract, you know, a lot of big global names. So Google, Expedia, Facebook, a lot of tech companies, but then also Goldman Sachs, Toyota, a lot of other more traditional companies that very much need to compete for the best talent, but they also need collaborative and innovative environments. And these precincts are very attractive places to work because of everything they offer outside the buildings, just as much inside. So I think that that amenity and that desire is going to accelerate. My last one is talking about the other office. So I think part of what's going to change going forward, and a lot of us are doing this already, is that it's not just home or work. It's home, work, and everything in between. So we're going to be working in more locations than ever before. So if you're in a small, if you're in a dense area, you've got a small apartment, you've got no dedicated office space, your partner might also be working from home, that can get really old really quickly. So we need some in-between options. So, you know, we've got cafes, co-working spaces, for large employers and large landlords. Small satellite offices were something that was already happening. So they function a little bit similar to co-working spaces, but therefore a more sort of select audience. And this is a bit of a value-added experience that many office landlords have been already starting to offer. So for example, if you're a tenant in one building in one city, you might have access to temporary workspace all around the country in the other buildings that these landlords own. And as we start to sort of move a bit more regionally as well, I think this is going to be really important. And there are a few companies are looking at doing that. And if you joined the retail webinar back in April, you would know a lot about how retail destinations are changing. And I expect the pace of co-working facilities popping up in shopping centres to accelerate, because that can be one of those in-between options. So, you know, it's got all the amenities, you've got shopping, you've got gyms, you've got dining, you've got entertainment and movie theatres, but it's not happening all at home amongst the laundry and the toast crumbs. So, so what I see workplaces being really important, still going to the future, but I think we're going to sort of start hopping around to a lot more options. So it's really interesting to see how that kind of plays out. So I think I've taken more than my share of time. I'm going to pass over to Emma now, who's going to talk to you sort of more about the experience of inside the workplace.
So thanks so much, Jennifer. Just before we move across to Emma, a couple of quick questions. I've got one or two to kick off with, and there's a few that are coming in the Q&A. It's interesting that you can see part of your term, it was a precinct to bring things together with all of the flexibility and diversity that modern workplaces and environments are sort of calling for. Does that tend to then go with, you know, bigger is better? And will that mean a lot of smaller workplaces, you know, an office for 15 people, an office for 20 people, that can't necessarily provide that? Do you think those smaller spaces will become less popular and to some extent maybe even die out?
I wouldn't say that at all, because I think there's a proportion of the population that are going to feel better to be in a smaller workplace. You know, they don't have to, you know, particularly if they have heightened concerns for their wellness, you know, around the current time. You know, you don't have to try and get into an elevator with 1,000 other people at the same time. And, you know, you've got that smaller space, you know who you're with. I think for them, it'll be about what's happening around me, and, you know, am I in a good location where where I might not be providing that other amenity, but it's provided by other businesses. So there might be great cafes in the street, there might be green space down the street, and then they'll sort of think about how do they do some of that amenity in a way that's smaller and more boutique. Certainly, if you're developing a big office precinct, you know, the world is your oyster.
Yeah.
But I don't think that rules out those smaller spaces. I think they have a lot to offer in a more boutique sense.
Yeah. Okay. All right. A question that Steve Burton's put to us, a little bit more of a technical nature, but his question sort of relates to whether you've got any evidence of buildings addressing the sick building syndrome and the transfer of, you know, a COVID outbreak, if you like. Have you heard anything around that at the moment? Because historically that hasn't been done, especially if you compare it to some of the more regimented maintenance regimes around fire systems. Has there been any talk that you've picked up, on that aspect?
Look, not so much, but that's probably because I don't tend to work directly in that kind of area. Emma might actually be able to answer that question better than me, being closer to sort of, I guess, the internal sort of side of the workplace. Emma, did you put you on the spot with that one?
I think I do touch on that a little bit in what I'm about to say. I think in terms of the spread of, you know, of bugs, I guess, internally, there is big talk around increasing fresh airflow into buildings. And I think that's the key that I've heard more than anything, is really increasing the fresh air intake, which means that we're not just recirculating the air that's full of germs.
Yeah.
That's one of the big ticket items. There's probably 1,000 others, but that's the main,
Okay, thanks, Emma. Two other quick questions before we move on with Emma's presentation. Thoughts on the impact of the pandemic on open shared workplaces? I mean, we are probably all familiar with the benefits of the open shared workplace, and you touched on it, but the flip side of that, it probably creates a greater risk. Jenna, have you heard anything of recent on the long-term nature of those shared workspaces?
Look, in terms of my experience and what I've kind of seen over the last few months is the first one is that when hot desking and all of that sort of, I guess, came in at the beginning, and those very open collaborative workspaces, is one of the things that was talked about a lot was that idea of, well, how do we stop everyone from catching the flu? We didn't know we were, and colds, etc. We didn't know we were going to be talking about COVID-19, but I've certainly seen and experienced workplaces that are very open and very shared in the space, and they already had a heightened degree, I guess, of you know, sort of sprays and wet wipes, and encouraging people to sort of clean up, you know, when they're finished and when they come and all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of already there from some degree. But I think the thing to think about is if we're saying the workplace is going to be more about collaboration, innovation, and coming together, rather than just turning up, sitting in the corner, getting my work done and leave, because if I'm not collaborating and I don't need to connect with lots of people or meet, there's no really any reason for me necessarily to be there. I figure that closed-in offices kind of defeat that purpose, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, everyone's got a very heightened sense of health and everything right now, but certainly some of the co-working spaces that I've seen have very much come back and are quite busy in the last few weeks. And talking to them, they said, well, we've actually got a different kind of client at the moment. It's those people that, you know, there might have been small businesses that were operating 5 days a week from a co-working space, and they've sort of said, oh, actually, I wouldn't mind working from home for a bit. But now they're seeing a new client, which is basically like, oh my God, I've just got to get out of the house.
Yeah.
So they definitely have to take more attention to that. But I don't think that that it's going to be an ongoing trend that people are scared to be in a shared space with others personally.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question here. I'm not sure who's put it in. It's anonymous, but the question is, and you touched on the WELL certification. Is that something you think post-pandemic might actually start to take off and be a real leasing and issue for key tenants?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important. I really like to see it. I don't mean to put the WELL rating down. I just get a little bit frustrated when the rating becomes the end in itself. The rating only exists as a way for people to measure and to understand and make progress towards a healthier and you know, better environment. It's not, but it's sometimes it becomes a goal in itself.
Yes.
So hopefully I think the focus will turn to, let's make it a great environment, and a WELL rating is a good way to share and communicate that, rather than let's just get a good WELL rating because we think it might mean something down the track.
So make it more than being tokenistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
real
And that
benefit.
happens with lots of those rating
It
systems.
does.
It's just remembering why the thing was created in the first place.
All right, that's good. We have one other question, but I might just try and see if I can work that in at the end to keep ourselves on track. So, but what I'd like to do now is just firstly thank Jennifer for what she's shared with us so far, and move on to Emma's presentation. So, if I could just introduce Emma. Emma is the owner of Eminence Designs in Brisbane. She has extensive experience in interior design, and particularly interest and expertise in disrupting the current thought on design. I'm sure that she's going to put some interesting thoughts out there for us. She's driven to create better living, working and community environments that provide a true holistic approach in the unfolding of built forms that support and nurture the life of organisations, I should say. I was thinking people as organisms, people and culture. So thank you, Emma, for joining us today. And I'd like to now hand over to you for your presentation, if I could.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Jen. It was really interesting and a great, great start. I will just share my screen, hopefully. Can you all see that?
Yes, thank you. That's great. Thanks, Emma.
Okay, great. All right. So thank you for having me. So I'd like to start with a little bit of a history around pandemic situations, and similar to what Jen said, how they've been catalysts for great change, and that our buildings and cities have often been shaped by disease. So it was cholera that influenced the modern street grid in the 19th century epidemic, and that promoted the introduction of sewage systems that required the roads to be wider and straighter. And our modernism phase was partly a result of the tuberculosis that introduced the light flooded sanatoriums, inspiring our era of white painted rooms and hygienic tiled bathrooms and our white clean aesthetics. And then it was the bubonic plague in 1855 that changed the design of drain pipes and door thresholds, building foundations in the global war against the rat. But just as much as form has followed function, is also followed the fear of infection. There is an author, Christos Linteris, who wrote the book The Plague in the City in 2018. And in his book, he talks of some of the advancements of building and infrastructure due to disease and illness. So for example, in his book, he talks of the advancements of the building and infrastructure due to disease and illness. An example of this is the ancient Greeks thinking disease was spread by vapours that rose up through the soil. So they started to pave the streets with flagstones to seal the earth up. But in Linteris's view, he sees the effect of epidemics and pandemics having a short-term effect unless they keep coming back over and over. He states that once the initial panic dissipates, then things typically return to normal. And that is one view. However, when people panic, it also eventuates in knee-jerk reactions that may not be where we ultimately see value or long-term investment. For example, plastic screens, we see them everywhere. And whilst they give us initial comfort, they potentially get dirty, they scratch and erode, they lose their impact. And how many times have you leant around one just to hear what someone is actually saying to you? But not only are they germ barriers, they are also sound barriers. Floor stickers are everywhere, some graphically designed, others just a great X on the floor. And these will wear out, and what of them then? We've got temporary laminated signs, all temporary and in place to get us back out and about and off to work, but at what cost? Do they become environmental landfill and rubbish? So this tells us we need to be more thoughtful about how we move on from here. To just go back a bit, workplace is a very hot topic. So for 2 decades, we've developed an entire workplace system around how we can better design spaces to meet the visions, aspirations and purposes of an organisation. And then earlier this year, we all went into panic to get people out of the office with a technology solution to get this work to continue from home. It was actually just like a bit of a forced experiment. Many employees started to address employee well-being holistically with an inclusion on assisting mental health. Leadership has become more important as leaders manage based on outcomes and objectives rather than being actually present. And company culture, which is the underpinning of the business, the unsaid whys and whats, ultimately translated into what people do when no one's looking, was and is especially critical, but also difficult to nurture in a work from home scenario. Our relationship with our teammates is a perfect example of a situation that is often strengthened over our work from home experience. And so how do we know? So what we do know is that for many work is social, And today, our co-workers will continue to occupy an important place in that experience. This one I particularly like. The traditional approach to work may not have always been welcoming to those with different capabilities. So that means physically, mentally, and socially. So allowing people to work from home has actually meant that people can contribute in new ways, allowing companies to realise that different capabilities are able to contribute in an equal capacity. So many companies have experienced a decrease in bureaucracy as decisions that needed to be made at speed have allowed individuals the ability to respond, allowing other individuals to respond, increasing efficiencies and decreasing decision-making bottlenecks. So all of these points are really about relationships between people and the maintenance of the office culture, the quality of leadership, diversity, and the strength of the technology provided. Not to mention that you have the ability to work in pyjamas from the comfort of your couch at whatever part of the day you liked. Importantly, a lot of companies say that productivity increased during our work from home period. But we have to remember that while we were working from home, we couldn't visit each other, we couldn't go to cafes, restaurants, go for shopping, therapy, bushwalks, the gym, or a swim. So the argument of boosting productivity is still out there for the jury. And we will be more productive now that we can be as easily distracted. So what we've learned is that we can actually work from anywhere. We've been pressed into letting go of an organisational reality that we were comfortable with. And as a result, change is evolving at a much faster pace. Moving forward, studies have shown that now we have had a taste of working from home and all its perks of comfort, managing your own time, no commute, and all importantly, not missing the office politics. There are a growing number of people who no longer wish to work in the office 5 days a week. So what is the reason for wanting to spend some time in the office? People seek people, collaboration, and the social side and human connection. So this, as Jen said, tells us the office is not dead. Getting back to work is not only important for the culture of the business, but also for the life of the city. What we know as designers is that we need to redesign thoughtfully and not knee-jerk. So moving forward, there are 4 main factors that I see that will grow a great place to work. Organisations are not buildings, they are teams of people. Leaders need to continue to lead with empathy and empowerment. And organisations and businesses need to acknowledge the variety of personalities, capabilities, and general differences of their teams and speak to their strengths. This includes the simple introvert and extrovert personality types, and those with difficulties and disabilities, and how we create spaces to be inclusive for the actual people of the organisation. And what does the built space look like? This will be a test for the built environment, and there will be some radical change on what we've always seen as acceptable. Some of it will be driven by leasing cycles and new incentives, as most workplaces are not funded by the occupier, and businesses cannot simply afford to radically change their environment. But at a first glance within the 4 walls, it may not be that different. If organisations embrace a new flexibility, it will mean there might be less workstations and more collaboration spaces, but we were already heading that way with our activity-based, agile and co-working spaces. This approach to creating spaces for different types of work and needs helps spread people out, adding diversity and variety to the workplace, whilst at the same time meshing with the needs for space optimisation. This would seem that it doesn't make economical or sustainable sense to give everyone a desk, and over the next couple of years we'll probably experiment with the ratios in space. Currently, workspaces are typically designed with 4 square metres per person, so nothing much changes here. Workstation sizes are often between 1.8 and 2 metres long, so they're already facilitating the 1.5 metre distance rule. We have large computer screens between us, so do we really need all that perspex? Ideally, this new workplace will be more considerate to humanity, more fluid, more sustainable, and hopefully not cost us as much. It will need to answer to a diversity of tolerance levels between a desire to work from home and a desire for social interactions. And then, beyond the 4 walls, get into work, people need to learn to trust again, and that is trust in the built environment and the envelope around it. As your workplace is a destination, to get you there, you need to venture through leaving home, into public space, onto public transport, and all of these things need to be addressed and satisfied as safe and sustainable before you even want to set foot into the building. Or we get on our bike after we've discovered our newfound love of cycling during our work from home state, to arrive at the office tower communal end of trip facility. Do we really feel comfortable in this space? And is this yet another opportunity for us to rethink the way we run and deliver these communal spaces? At the building and beyond our workplace, imagine being greeted by a new frontline type of worker, the concierge, who navigates the entrance and the lift to put you at ease and allow you to not touch a thing. We might also be greeted by thermal cameras. Alternatively, the building is smart, eliminating the direct contact with communal services from the street to the workstation. This automated office provides contactless pathways where employees rarely have to touch a surface with their hands in order to navigate through the building. Lifts are called from a smartphone, avoiding the need to press a button, and office doors open automatically using motion sensors and facial recognition, and the blinds are automated. Lighting will have sensors that include heat mapping and a high proportion of UV, and HVAC systems could include pathogen filters and, more importantly, a large proportion of fresh air intake. Whilst kitchen taps, toilets and hand basins require no touch, and ordering a coffee is all controlled from your phone. Imagine if there were new legislations introduced to enforce a reduction in the occupancy of lifts and the overcrowding of lobbies. What does this mean to our high-rise and super towers? Do low-level towers and low-level occupancies of levels 5 to 1, 1 to 5 suddenly become more attractive, and hence a change to the highest rents? And what about the satellite offices and the diversification of other locations to work from? Maybe we don't leave our suburb anymore, but access the remote office links slightly more to our organisation than a straight co-working space. Even our residential design may be affected, as we are now motivated by the need to provide an actual office within our homes. And what of multi-res developments? These too need to be equipped with facilities to allow for co-working spaces or shared office facilities, so that those in apartments that require the amenity to be able to successfully work from home can do so. And then there is nanotechnology. This has already been developed slightly in the textile design industry, and it incorporates silver particles into the actual fabric manufacture, which has an antimicrobial quality, and it kills bacteria. So could this type of scientific development be implemented on a larger scale in our building materials, our homes and our workplaces to assist in the combat and spread of disease? I guess that's a whole new webinar. So it all comes down to rebuilding trust in the built environment. Ultimately, the aim of this time of reinvention will be what good companies have always wanted: a safe environment where people can enjoy their work, collaborate with their colleagues and achieve the objectives of their organisations, whilst providing that ever more attainable work-life balance. Importantly, it's not one model or the other, but a hybrid of many things. And perhaps something worth thinking about is that everyone on Earth is currently facing the same challenge. So as a result, the role of the office has fundamentally changed. It isn't somewhere you have to be, it's somewhere you want to be. And this means people now expect more from how to create a great place to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. There were some really great insights there. A few particularly caught my mind. So it's interesting. I suppose a question I have myself is how quickly and to what extent might some of these changes be starting to be considered and designed into our buildings? And particularly the slide you put up there around more technology and no touch options to just mitigate the ability to pick up the infection and that sort of stuff. Have you got any real feel as to how quickly either things might be scoped or specified by clients, or in fact actually mandated through legislation?
I think there are many things that we can do quite quickly. There are some things like we've got taps that you don't need to touch. Those sorts of things can be implemented quite quickly and probably not to a great cost. Other things like automated lifts and facial recognition are slightly more expensive, and I guess that's a building issue more so. All of these things cost money, and I guess really what it boils down to is, as I touched on, I think there was, once leases start to come to an end and people look at new office spaces, they can potentially get their leasing incentives and other ways of starting to afford some of these changes. And I think it'll be a slow progression with a few things that we can do straight away.
Yeah, but I think you've given us enough insight to think there's going to be so many different ways we're going to see innovation and advancement from the traditional stereotype building to make them a healthier building. So yeah, I'm really keen to see what we'll see in some of the things around Green Star, around well ratings, or potentially even legislation to see some of those things really kick into life. A question there that Graham Schofield has put up, and I'll try and condense it a little bit, but Graham makes the really important point that although the increasing of outside air rates to our buildings does include our wellness in some respects, it creates issues around humidity control and particularly high energy use. So there's a couple of current methods around UV ultraviolet light emitters or potentially HEPA filters that provide better quality or better filtration without increased outside air. But I suppose it'd be interesting to see whether you've had any conversations or picked up on anything to actually allow us to get over that increased outside air versus better filtration of air. And that potentially is going to be a key area we should see some change in, I would expect.
Yeah, I think that's a big question. There's a lot in that.
Yeah, I suppose the thing to me, like what pointed out to me is what's good in one respect creates problems on the others. You know, there's a balance of you get a benefit there, but it has hit over there. But yeah, so issues like that are going to take a little bit of time, I think, to work through, and much easier to integrate into a new building than what it's going to be to retrofit to an existing building.
And I think as our technology improves and our systems and processes change, we'll become more efficient. And now that it's such a hot topic and it is so relevant, some of those things will probably be focused on to a faster and quicker degree than potentially they have been. So I suspect as we make more advancements in those areas, these things, yes, they'll bring up other issues like everything in our building and environments do, or with change there becomes other issues. But I think that over time,
Yeah, so some of those things are somewhat of an immediate sort of solution, and others that you'd expect are going to take a bit of time to work their way through, because you know buildings are very much integrated in every respect. So you can never look at one aspect in isolation. They really need to be brought together because buildings very much are a mix and amalgamation of a lot of different things. Yeah. And you touched on a point there a little bit earlier about the longevity of some of our changes that have been brought about by the immediacy of COVID. Do you genuinely believe that some of the changes are going to be long term, or do you fear that they're going to be okay? We're through that really bad period. That was 2020. COVID's gone. It's back to normal. Forget all the good practices.
I'd like to say that we could forget it and it will go away. But I suspect that what we're seeing in Victoria potentially is showing that it may not be that easy. And I think if it's not COVID, there's potentially something else that might, come up behind it. I suspect that there will be changes in design long term. And I think that, like anything, like some of the other pandemic changes that I mentioned before, they have made changes to the way we build and what we do, even in our infrastructure. So I suspect that this will probably have some kind of follow-on effect too. But I think we need to be sensible about what those changes are and actually think through carefully how we do it, so we're not just making change for change's sake. Yes.
Yeah. All right. There was a question there from Paul, which I'm not sure sits best with you, Emma, or Jennifer, around large professional firms that are potentially going to push hard on the blend of office work versus remote, whether it's going to see us with an immediate glut on some of the better quality, larger office spaces. Has there been anything sort of peripherally that either of you have picked up on to indicate a real immediate change there?
Do you want to start with that one, Emma?
No, you're right. You're good.
I guess that question sort of got two parts to it. We could probably answer them together. So I think it's a little bit early to call the glut and the dropping of rents yet. I think, certainly the office developers that I'm working with are kind of, particularly ones that are in a sort of a pre-development stage or a planning stage for a DA or something, are sort of saying, well, let's not react to knee-jerk just yet. But if I had to kind of put my finger on something for the future, I would sort of say that I think if you can meet some of those, you know, those amenity needs around green spaces and you know, build that really compelling proposition, you'll be able to sort of keep your position in the market. But if you don't offer that, and you have no way of offering that, and you don't make it a focus, I think some of those sort of more B grade assets might suffer. That's a bit of a guess, because overlaying the whole wellness thing is also the economic situation. So so it's a bit hard to say that and then also say, oh, but then, you know, a tighter economy, people aren't going to be thinking, oh, maybe I'll go somewhere a little bit cheaper. So it's a little bit difficult to call it, but as in any market, when we see when things get tight, places still survive and thrive, and those are the ones that do things differently, offer something different, and, you know, kind of hold their value in terms of their...
Yeah, thank you.
And I mean, just to add to that, just the trend of, you know, where we're seeing workplaces changing is that if people aren't coming back to work and there is a lesser number of bums on seats, for want of a better word, they're actually looking at creating more collaborative spaces, because I think the whole intent is that people will technically do their process work at home or elsewhere and then come to work to collaborate. So instead of having workstations, they'll have a lot more of a collaboration sort of space. So that space is being used for other purposes.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. A question that Steve Burton's put up says that when we talk about planning these large urban spaces that adjoin you know, commercial office space and that sort of stuff, who should ultimately pay for the land to provide that? And are councils capable of, you know, holding the green line to developers to ensure that our new developers going forward, yeah, don't allow these spaces to be underprovided and crammed in?
Yeah, so to the second part of that question, yes, that's already happening. So in terms of local government influencing developers, and not sort of, you know, making them do something they want to do. A lot of cases, it's about a, you know, the developer knows, if they're a forward-thinking developer, that having green space on their land, etc., isn't something they're necessarily being forced to do. They know it's something they should do and it adds value to their business. But then there are a lot of those conversations already happening and those projects already playing out. So, for example, Key Quarter on Circular Quay has a elevated park as part of the development, and that park operates as a public park. So the public have right of access. I think it's open to the public from 6 a.m. to 12 midnight, roughly. Don't quote me on those, every day. And there's a large sort of piece of public artwork there, and there is an easement, and that provides for the people of the city to use that as a public park. So so there's one sort of example, and obviously that's the developer's space. And but in other cases, it sort of depends on the context. So if you're doing a large development and you adjoin a large space that is publicly owned, and the city wants you to leverage that space, so the city might, I think, potentially Darling Quarters a little bit in this scenario where you know, it's public space, they don't want the developer to take it, but then the developer makes a contribution to putting something like a playground or some amenity on that space at their own cost, which is both creates value for the community because anyone can come and use it and enjoy it free, and then it also creates value for the building as well because it's got this lovely experience on their doorstep, and it helps that thing I was talking about earlier about body clock and growing productivity of the site and making sure it's used for more hours in the day, more hours in the week by more people for more different reasons. So it sort of depends on the context a little bit, but yes, absolutely, that's already happening in terms of developers creating that space in partnership. Yeah.
Thank you. It's interesting when I think it through, that there's some paradoxes in my mind, at least, in that with the pandemic, we isolated, we drew back, we put really hard borders around ourselves, yet there's this overall thinking that we need to have more shared facilities, shared service, we need to be more together, yet that then brings an inherent risk around us on the health side. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see, you know, what that new blend is, mix is going forward, and what innovation and change we see to allow us to sort of get the best of both sides of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think open public space, the value of open public space is massively, is really been appreciated over previous months. There was a bit of a study done in Europe over the last few months, whereby when particular, I can't remember which countries they were off the top of my head, but it was a multiple country study, and they talked to people about in a sort of a more of a lockdown phase, the value of public open space. And what they saw is that people were using it a lot more and valuing it a lot more, and saying things like, I really appreciate this space like I never thought I would now, because it's somewhere to go. It's really adding value to my life, and I really see myself going forward using this more. And so I think the value of collaborative open space in public space is really, really important. And of course, not everyone's going to do that. There's always going to be the developer who just doesn't want to do it, and they want to go highest and best use, and they want to maximize every cent from that development. And as someone's just noted to me in the chat there, they've had experience recently of a developer who basically put one tree in a courtyard or in a car park. And there's always going to be that, isn't there? Like there's the people that build the house and say, well, I'm going to build a smaller house and I'm going to have more backyard because that's adding value to my life. And then there's going to be the people saying, no, I want the mansion. I want to push out to the boundaries on every possible scale, and I want to take all the space. So there's going to be both ends of the spectrum. But certainly, development, depending on what market you're in, if you're in that sort of premium office market, you need to know what the best tenants want, and you need to respond to those things. If you're not in that market, your world might be slightly different. But in that end of the market, they're very focused on, what do people want? How do I facilitate the best workplace environment and culture? And that enables me to attract like the best possible tenants, and those really premium tenants that are sort of a catalyst for everybody else. If you get the KPMG, the Deloitte, the Accenture, etc., everyone goes, oh, that must be a really premium place. I'm interested in that place. So at that end of the spectrum, I don't think you can get away with one tree in a car park, if that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you for that. If I could just probably share one of my experiences of managing a group of people of say 30 over the COVID period, I suppose the importance to the office has sort of become a bit clearer to me. So we've gone fully remote, and we've done some really great work. We've pushed a lot of work out, but it sort of ties in with your comment before about culturally connected together apart, and having that cultural and social fabric to make it work. What we found is our younger staff particularly wanted to get back in the office quicker. They missed the social interaction. They missed the going to and from work, spending a bit of time having lunch together, and those sorts of things. And then also you made the point about having purpose when you're in the office. At the moment, when we had, say, a third of the people, you come into the office, but you couldn't do the regular day-to-day things. So it didn't give you that purpose. So I think office spaces in the future have really got to be designed to allow us to go with purpose and intent. But I think they're going to be absolutely critical to allow us to develop the culture and the social fabric that we need to make our organisation what it is, to allow us to work potentially to a larger extent remote. Because if you haven't got that common bond, you lose what your culture is, and then it just all falls away. So it'll be interesting to see what we see around that going forward. But certainly it becomes a homely, comfortable space for people to live in and grow that culture and social fabric of what your organisation is all about.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's what I was talking about earlier with social capital. If in the last few months, most of the people that I have worked with are people that I've known for quite some time, and I have a built up, established in-person relationship with them. So communicating over Zoom or whatever is not so much of an impediment to our relationship, because we established the relationship in the real world. But then I've got one, just personally speaking, a new client that I took on board a few weeks ago, and we're actually meeting for the first time next week in person. And whilst we've been working really well together, we're actually both really looking forward to that meeting, because it's kind of like, I've only gotten so far with how I can relate and interact with this person over Zoom. And I think now that we sit down and we talk about the next phase of our project together, I think that will elevate the relationship So you know, so cries at the end of the workplace, we've been fine, we don't need it, we're all doing Zoom drinks on Fridays and Zoom bingo on Thursdays. It's kind of like, yeah, but you built up that relationship before. So I'll be really interested to see what's going ahead. And of course, there's the people who actually don't like working with other people, don't need to work with other people, and if they can work from home forever, good luck to them.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, our social capital, I think, like we started out hard as a group with social drinks on Friday, virtual. They've run their course. You know, people are wanting to spend some one-on-one time to have, you know, a whole of office lunch or morning tea or those sort of things in purpose. So I think it's in person, I should say. So yeah, it's very much, you've still got to have that place to bring everybody together. Yeah. Emma, did you want to add anything to that at all?
No, I agree, and I think that the biggest issue is that I think, as we all did, when we went to work remote, we were all on projects, we were all focused, we all had our teams, we were all working well. That stopped when we worked from home, so we continued that momentum. But what happens when you start getting new employees into an office, or you know, when you want to engage someone differently in a different way, it's harder to do that remotely. It's harder to get them involved in that culture, to introduce them to new team members and to get them feeling like they're part of the organisation. There is a component of that still needs to happen in person.
Yeah. We managed to actually start a few people totally remotely. We had a mechanical engineer joined us. He was in Bathurst at the time. He had to work 2 weeks, his first 2 weeks totally virtually. Now come to Queensland. He's now in quarantine. So he's in week now. And I've managed to see him in person once, but it doesn't surprise you what you can do when you have to.
Yeah. So how long can you sustain it for? That's the question I wonder. You know, how long can it go on before it just becomes too difficult?
Yeah, and I mean, just to see facial expression when he walked in the office Monday morning to collect to go and work remotely, yeah, you just understand the value of that in-person contact, which yeah, is so important for that social capital. Yeah. Well, surprisingly enough, it doesn't seem as though we have any more questions. So all I can say to that is that Jennifer and Emma have done a great job and touched on just about everybody's queries that we might have on this very topical issue today. So unless anybody wants to just put any quick questions up, which I don't think we do, Jennifer and Emma, do you guys have anything else left to add, or are you happy to draw a close?
Only that. Thanks everyone for dialing in and listening. If you think of something afterwards and say, I wish I'd asked that, please just reach out. You can find LinkedIn's probably the easiest. I'm more than happy to talk about this stuff until the cows come home. Because I think it's really interesting and we're at a really interesting time. And I think the more we put our heads together, even if it's only on Zoom or only on the phone at the moment, I think it's really worth doing, because there's a lot of challenges coming our way, and if we collaborate more, we're going to solve them better, I think.
Certainly, yeah.
No, thank you, everyone. And I'm actually really excited to see what the next year brings us, and to actually see if what we're saying now is really what we'll do and how things will change. So yeah, stay tuned.
It certainly will be interesting to reflect in the next 12 months as to where we've now transitioned from that post-COVID era, and what that new normal, if new normal, has actually even been established at that point. Very interesting times. So on the strength of that, without any further questions, I'd like to wrap up now and close our webinar. And a really sincere and heartfelt thank you to Jennifer and Emma for giving us the time, and more importantly, sharing with us their extensive experience and insights with us. It's been absolutely magic to do that. And I think Jennifer's already hinted at it, but if you would like to reach out to Jennifer or email directly with any questions after our webinar, we'll include their contact details in the email that we'll send out in the next couple of days, including a link to the recording. So yeah, we hope attending the webinar today has been a real value to you. It's very topical, and I'm sure everybody has got good value. We'll be running sort of more webinars in the future on interesting topics. And if you'd like to be kept up to date on future events, then just follow us on DMA Engineers, most appropriately on LinkedIn. And keep an eye out, please, in the inboxes for the recording of the webinar in the next 24 hours or so. Thanks very much for attending, and see you next time.
Thanks, Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.